I'm Chip White, and I'm the Region 2 Program Improvement Specialist in Northeast Alabama. And I've been a national judge for proficiencies several times. I've also judged National Chapter Award and American Star in agribusiness and research and entrepreneurship. So I've seen a lot of proficiency applications and the proficiency type applications. And it's one of my favorite things to do. I enjoy doing workshops. And my wife puts these PowerPoints together for me, and she does a good job of getting those. What we're going to try to show y'all today is how to get to the road to gold. I pass out Tootsie Rolls, and if you didn't get a Tootsie Roll, you need to let me know, because it's an important part of what we're going to do. Some of you have seen this slide before if you've been to a recent workshop. The outside shell, the hard candy part, the majority of the proficiency application sections, holds it all together. But the best part of the Tootsie Roll Pop, everybody knows, is on the inside. And I want you to take a look at this point breakdown. A lot of people don't understand how to score well on a proficiency application. That's what this is about. That's what the Tootsie Roll Pop symbolizes. All this shell on the outside that holds it all together, the SAE explanation, the challenges, the impact, the opportunities, only comes to 36 points. The middle, size, scope, financials, learning outcomes, and skills, 64 points of your application is going to come from that. And we're going to go over today how to get those 64 points so that you know when you turn yours in, hey, I'm going to have a good shot at scoring well because I have taken the time to answer the size, scope, and financials, learning outcomes, and the skills. Market's going to help me score better. These three areas are going to make a huge difference in your application. Oh, yeah. That's great. Thank you. All right. You want to tell your story in a framework that's going to be easy for the judge to read and make sense and not be confusing for them. Each question guides students in an application on telling their story. The major updates that came from National FFA this January, the focus for proficiencies has shifted more toward showing growth from year to year, using records to show that growth, and size and scope, and SAE, and in career choices, safety practices are now more specifically addressed. We want judges to look at the application, be able to visualize where you are in that application. And I want you to be able to see growth through skills and knowledge. You don't have, all your growth doesn't have to be in scope or hours. If you grow in hours, you need to grow in skills as well. Because if you've grown in hours and you haven't grown in skills, there's no growth there. You want to make sure that your hours are reasonable. And you want to make sure that it's your work. Okay?
So this is one of the things I think confuses a lot of people. I know it confused me when I started filling out proficiency applications. I thought, well, if I've got a student that is just doing a little, I don't need to submit a proficiency application on that student because there's somebody out there, like I got a student that's got 40 backyard chickens. I don't need to submit a poultry proficiency. Somebody out there's got 6 mega houses, so we're going to get beat. Well, this year's state winner had how many chickens?
24.
24. So 24 chickens. It's really not about the most money doesn't always win. That's the way I thought it was. I thought it was the most money wins. Well, reasonable. They want your money to be reasonable. I wouldn't get flagged for making too much money, and then you have to explain why you made that much money. But, it's really all about that growth, the skills and the knowledge, and even though some of those paragraphs are not worth a lot of points, telling the story, tying it all together, can actually get you more points in those areas that.
You really need to spend some time on those to make that judge feel like he knows you. That's important.
The judges will feel different about that when they're looking at your SAE, if they know what they're looking at from those paragraphs.
Yep. Okay. All right, performance review A. As we start to look at that, performance review A is the introduction to your SAE. It's the first question asks for an SAE description, how the student got involved in the project. Now, when you start talking about that, tell us if it took money to get you involved, where'd that money come from? That's something what we ran into time and time again. Well, I've got 40 bred heifers. Where's the money come from? Nobody, or the biggest part of those guys, never told us where the money comes from. What is your SAE? Tell us what it is. Describe any non-cash exchanges. If you're working doing barter and working for pasture rent, or you're doing barter, you're working for your folks in exchange for drainage is a good example. You know, you've got garden space to grow your vegetables. You've got place to can your stuff. Do you pay rent to make your pickles? No. So that somewhere along the way, because it's from your own home, you're just working. You work for your parents in exchange for that rent. And everything that can be explained needs to be explained, because that just makes it clear and easy to read. That's Alan Waters' statement, and some of you know Alan. Always make it clear and easy to read. And because they have so many of these things to read, if they're not easy to read, you're going to have a problem. You want to identify your roles and responsibilities. What, if you're working for somebody else, what do you do? And how does that influence the growth of your SAE? What skills have you learned? You want to identify challenges in part 3. Identify the challenge and how you address that challenge. If you don't do both, you can't get all the points. If you've got a challenge, you've got to tell how you address that challenge. And they only want one challenge. They don't want a list of challenges. Just one. And I read one time years ago. My biggest challenge is when my heifer got out and I had to go catch her and put her back. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
what would your biggest challenge be in time management?
Yes. It could very well be time management.
But how many have you read that say time
million
management?
of them that say time management is my biggest challenge. If it is, tell me, and one thing that you need to remember too is age is not a challenge. And the one way you can fix that, and that's to get over. What the challenge is, age was my biggest challenge because I could not drive. No, not being able to drive was the biggest challenge. So how did you solve that problem? You solved your age problem by getting older. You solved your not being able to drive problem by catching rides, and maybe you get your parents to agree to carry you. However you solved it needs to be addressed. That's high performance on that part. And here, these three together are worth 9 points. Okay? We have a little sliding scale there. You can go all the way from 0 to -3.
I have a question. So at what point will, for example, the proficiencies or any of the applications, crime prevention, any of them, that we turned in for state be available for us to view and see the notes that were made on them?
They should be available now. We're talking to the guy that actually put them up there, and I made them all the comments It should be available for you to see.
Okay.
Mine's not showing for feedback.
Okay, some of the judges did not put any feedback.
A lot of the judges did not put anything
Yep.
back.
I had somebody call last night and said, you know, I can't see my feedback, can't see my feedback. So I went in there and checked, and there wasn't any feedback.
It's frustrating how many judges will flag an application and not
Yeah.
put any
So I tell
feedback
you
as to
what,
why.
I tell judges when we start, if you flag it, you need to put an explanation on there why you flagged it. And you still do that. That's something that we're gonna work on next year. While on that subject, I had a letter from National FFA. Next year, there will be no sliding scale. So you cannot do any next year that are half entrepreneurship and half placement. They'll either be one or the other, all the way, which is gonna mean probably, I know I need Andrew, I meant to talk to Andrew about this, probably we're gonna have two sets of judges, one set that will judge entrepreneurship, and one judge set to judge placement, because if one judge is doing them both, placement's easier to judge. And entrepreneurship is, I don't want it to get left out or looked over. I want somebody judging entrepreneurship that's gonna really take some time. There won't be as many entrepreneurship, because a lot of times teachers don't wanna do those, so they will make a placement anytime they can. Talked to Andrew Waters last night, and he said, you know, he was doing proficiency, he tried to make them all placement if he could. Can't always do that, but that's the reason behind it. Andrew, you got anything else you want to say?
I want to say one thing before we move on from this one. Even before you get to your performance review A, you really need to start by looking at and reading very closely those SAE descriptions for the different proficiency award categories. Because you need to start with that in your mind. You need to make sure, as you describe your SAE, especially in that opening paragraph, you need to make sure that that aligns with the description for that category. We've got a lot of people in the state, and the reason why I know this is I've been on the committee. We have a committee in the state right now that looks over some of the applications that get flagged every year. And we've made a ton of progress in Alabama over the last 2 or 3 years in the area of plagiarism, and then also in the area of flagged applications. We've made a lot of progress. First year, we had a lot of plagiarism. Now, we barely deal with any plagiarism.
2 or 3 this summer.
2 or 3 we have to look at that are plagiarism get flagged. But then on the flagged applications, we still struggle, especially with have people that submit in multiple areas, which is fine. I have students that submit in multiple areas. What you cannot do, or what you should not do, is submit the exact same application in multiple areas. If you have an application that fit, or if you have an SAE that fits in different areas, you need to fill out different applications for those areas and make sure that your application aligns.
This is where you've got to address that.
Yeah,
Here.
it really needs to be clear in these 3 paragraphs.
Now, one thing for the people that are going to be watching this that are brand new, explain to them how good the plagiarism apparatus we've got in place is at catching it.
Or it's gonna get anything that is if it's more than 50 characters or up to 50 characters that match, it's gonna catch it. And it can actually catch some that are common phrases and things like that we have to go back and check. And you know, if it's a common phrase that's used in an application 3 or 4 years ago, it'll catch it.
I mean, anything you copy and paste,
Yeah.
a segment of material is going to get caught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could not even be copied and pasted. It could be something you just say.
If your brother filled out a proficiency award, you need to fill out your own proficiency award. You don't need to copy a paragraph out of his proficiency award. If your cousin
Yeah.
filled out a proficiency award, that's what we run into a lot of times is, it's siblings, cousins, people who, you know, they knew each other and they're doing a lot of the same stuff. And so they said, well, I'll just use some of the stuff he said. Well, don't, because it's gonna get flagged. It is so good at catching plagiarism that it's caught some this year that was not actually plagiarism, that we as a committee, Mr. Blanton in particular, had to kind of track down and confer with some different people and figure out that, hey, this was just some common phrases that got caught in there by coincidence. But it will catch, if you copy and paste anything, it will get caught.
Oh, yeah, it'll catch you every time.
Another thing I want to say about this is also your best spot in the application, because you're kind of opening up. This is where every judge that's worth anything as a judge is going to read this part of the application. They might skim through some of the rest of it, but they're gonna read this because they wanna see, you know, your introduction. So this is where, if you have anything unique about your SAE, any unique circumstances, anything that you think makes yours different, this is where it needs to be. You need to highlight that in your opening paragraph and in your challenge as well. Because I've noticed that unique wins a lot of times.
Yes.
If there's something that's different about what you do that nobody else is really doing, that's what a lot of judges want to see. Something that you've come up with that's innovative, the judges want to see that, you know, and they want to hear about your challenge. Do not make your challenge time management unless you're sandbagging and trying not to win, because if your challenge is time management, so is 50% of the applications
Yeah,
out there.
you see about 50% of them.
And, you know, that's not a good challenge to overcome. What did you deal with your circumstances that no one else really had to deal with? And then how did you overcome that? It could be like an actual physical problem. I had an application a few years ago that the biggest challenge, it was a home and community development, which now the closest thing we have to that is service learning. But this particular student had worked on a church a lot, and helped to build a new building, and they had to redo the parking lot and everything. Well, church is at the base of a mountain, bottom of a hill. Their biggest challenge was water. How are we gonna get this to drain without causing big gullies and stuff around there? And so he was a part of that, how they actually had to go and dig some ditches, and they had to get some of that big rock and stuff like that. He talked about that in his application. It's a pretty good challenge. I mean, it was real, you know, and it was something that they had to address, and it was something that was a lot of hard work went into it. So that one worked pretty good, you know, and I've seen some others that were really good, talking about, you know, different challenges that they overcome. Had a student this year that was in service learning. One of the reasons why he's in service learning is his brother has some pretty severe challenges in life, and learning disabilities, things like that, which is kind of giving him an appreciation for that and for special education, that sort of thing. And so he wrote about that in his greatest challenge, you know, but then also in how that helped him to become a better person, to learn how to work with those special populations. Things that are unique need to go in right there.
Leslie, what was your greatest challenge, Leslie?
I would say, finding the supplies that I needed, and I had already built it.
Okay. And how did you solve the greatest challenge?
I did some research and found out that you mix up some baking soda and water, and don't dish soap and water, and you spray it on the leaves, it'll get rid of the mildew.
Okay. Leslie she has a really neat one, makes a fine pickle too, by the way. She grows her own cucumbers and makes the pickles and markets those pickles, and an agricultural product. And, she actually had applications in several different ones.
Where do you sell them?
Just looking for whatever I
I didn't know if you had like a Facebook page or if you
I
set them
do.
up at the co-op or.
Maze Pickles, and that's the name of it?
can.
It, you know, I've never had one like that before, but it's different. The service learning one, it's come along, it's different than what. If you want to do a service learning one, by the way, make sure that you set up a committee in chapter, and because it asks this question, did your chapter approve your service learning project? I didn't realize that was actually a thing, but when I started doing the research on the rubric, it wants you to set that up. And it's strictly just a community service type. Your community service committee will be the one that will say, you know, that needs to be done. And make sure you get that done. This is how to write one up. This was actually one of my son's proficiency applications years and years ago. This is a pretty good start on this one. This is how, pretty much not to do it. There's too much in there that we don't need. Judges are not gonna know your grandfather, so they don't need to know his name. It's okay to put where he lives, but it doesn't tell your story. Now, I used to see a lot of them like this. I raised beef cattle, therefore my proficiency is this. I saw that was common. So what you want to do, this is a pretty clear understanding of what your application is. Now, we didn't at that time tell very much about how he got his money. You know, how did he exchange his labor? How much pasture rent did he require? How much more did he have to do to exchange the pasture rent? So told where he got his first heifer, but it didn't tell a lot about the other stuff. So it needs to be a little more in depth than that. Once again, you can lose a point here. You can go below zero. So that's new in the rubric. You don't want to go below zero. Andrew, got anything on that?
Make sure your cows really are beef cows, but
Yeah.
I say they are.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we see some that, here are my beef cows, and they'll be all dairy cows. And then they'll turn in like 3 applications. And, one of them on beef, and one of them on dairy, and one of them on diversified. And they'll all be the same cows in the same place, all off the internet. That's, you want to avoid those internet pictures. You
Yeah,
never
that's plagiarism.
Yeah.
It's just different form of plagiarism, but if your pictures come off Google, that's
And
plagiarism.
that gets you disqualified, that gets your whole application disqualified.
Yeah. You know, you want to be as descriptive as you can while also leaving out those details that a judge somewhere who doesn't know you and doesn't really care exactly where you're from doesn't need to know, you know. But as specific as possible, make sure you put how many acres, make sure you put how many head of cattle, you know, make sure you leave all that description in there that is important, and then you can leave out. And then also, you know, another difference here is you got 10 versus 10. Save characters when you can, because you want to use all the characters that you can.
Your explanation will be better if you save the characters.
That's just saving one character, but it's a good example of how to write these to save characters.
Okay, accomplishments. Accomplishments need to relate to your SAE. There, if you're in a National Honor Society or Beta Club or something, that's not an accomplishment that necessarily relates to your SAE. You identify that accomplishment describe how each brought measurable growth to your SAE. Everything you do needs to be measured. That's just, that goes back to SMART goals and everything that's available to us for use needs to go back to SMART goals. This is number 1 and 2 are the accomplishments. Number 3 changed this year. It is now an issue, trend, or policy or technology that has a measurable impact on your SAE. In a garden, the controversial Roundup, spraying in weeds in the garden, that could be something that's brought up an impact. Maybe you're using something else, maybe you're using vinegar now instead of Roundup, that kind of thing. Maybe because you're producing something that you're going to eat later on, be very careful about how you do that. Andrew, what have you run into on this?
We mostly focused on issues, on that new question this time. I'll use Alex Lee as an example. He's got really good vegetable production and fruit production, SAE, and their whole family is real big about sustainability and producing their own food and that sort of thing. So we made his issue inflation. And the cost of groceries in the grocery store has gone up to the point that they are, it's more important now than ever to be able to grow and produce your own food. So that's what we talked about in his, on both his fruit production and his vegetable production, SAE. I know I had one who focused on technology. There's, I think, equine, I'm not an expert, but is there some sort of magna wave or something? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Okay. Yeah, she talked about that and learning how to use that in hers. So it needs to be relevant and just something that's new, that's come along, whether it be, issue, trend, policy, or technology. It could be drones, maybe you're using drones on the farm, or you got a student that's using drones on the farm. Maybe they've gotten a new implement for their tractor that makes it a lot easier to do something. But that's what it's looking for.
It wants to see how you're keeping up with current trends in technology. Maybe you remember what your was on that one?
One of the most important things, if you've got an older application, is just look at it and make sure that you've updated that paragraph 3, because there was several of them, I think, statewide that got turned in that still had a third accomplishment down there because they never went and updated it.
It was just the same as my challenges, trying to figure out, not being able to find the spices that I need, supplies that I need.
Okay.
How they're done.
Yours will score better at national level if we use something just a little bit different. The trend away from Roundup type stuff to spray weeds in your garden, or whatever. We'll think of something. Anyway, that's kind of what those in performance review be. Now, performance review C is the next thing we're going to look at, and it is tremendously changed. It is an entirely different question. A lot of those, it's only 2 points. 2 points can be very important. Okay, you need to describe your career choice, and it does not have to be an agricultural career choice. And how you went about choosing it. and 2 experiences that helped in that choice. These 2 right here, or these 3, are worth 8 points. And once again, you can get a 0 on it if you loop it up. Now, make sure that once you identify it and you worry about how you worry about choosing it, there's always 2 parts to these things, or most of the time there is. And you've got to do both parts in these maximum points. Remember, you got
Yeah. And the career objective does not have to be related to your SAE. It does not even have to be related to agriculture. That career objective is whatever that student's career objective is. And that made me a little nervous, honestly, because, you know, if I have a kid that's wanting to go into, wanting to be an attorney or something like that, or just wanting to do something that has absolutely nothing to do with agriculture, I felt like that might hurt with some of the judges, you know, but they say that it does not, okay? But it also asks for how, doesn't it ask for how your SAE has influenced your career choice?
How your SAE has influenced that choice. It could be that, hey, I did this and hated it, and I don't want to ever do it again. But, and it could be, you know, ways that, you know, it's to help you develop a work ethic, you know, anything along that line.
You've learned financial skills, how to manage money, things like that. You've learned record keeping, just things, anything along that line that you can kind of tie them together. But it's asking for their actual career objectives.
Put skills in there if you can actually,
And then those 2 experiences, if you can tie them back to how they have prepared for that career, you need to do that. I'll use an example. This time I had a student who has joined the Marines. He's Harris Island right now. But his SAE, the Ag Mechanics Design and Fabrication. And so it was easy to talk about his career objective. It was a little bit more difficult to find 2 experiences in construction that tie back to the Marines, it felt like. But we were able to, you know, we talked about, I think the 2 that he talked about was number 1, teamwork, learning how to work with a team of people. And he's one that's been in construction his whole life, and so he's kind of been at every spot on the team, worked his way up to where he's actually one that has a little bit of say now. And then the other thing I think he talked about was, I can't remember if it was learning how to just follow directions, complete a task, something along those lines. Maybe complete a task. But anyways, we were able to tie it all together, and that's kind of what they're looking for.
So part C may have nothing to do with your project.
Right.
Well, these 2 are supposed to have something to do with your project, but also tie back to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be, you might want to be a doctor, but you had the project professional part. And that, it's, what did you learn, what you're doing for the professional part that helps you, you know, in your.
And then, you know, the other thing that I ran into this time is, what about those kids that don't know what they want to do yet? Because, I mean, we have a lot of those kids, if we're honest, in our classes that say, you know, Mr. Brock, I don't know, you know, I'm gonna go to Sneed and hope for the best, is what a lot of them tell me, you know, like, they have no idea exactly what their career wants to be. And so what do you tell them? I said, pick one. I said, pick one and write about it. And, you know, nobody's gonna check and see if that's what you did 10 years from now. But pick one, and that's your career objective right now.
And you might let them go back and look at those, you know, the career objectives in AET and let them take that career challenge thing.
Yeah, the aptitude inventory.
Yeah. There you go, you can put that in there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, your SAE name and description. complete SAE description, size, scope, responsibilities, hours, income. And where is our SAE description? Where do you find that? Where do you put it in?
All this is pulled from AET. So you've got to put all of this in AET to get it to pull into the proficiency award.
Where in AET do we do it? Clipboard.
Yep. and that-
All the clipboard. You use this clipboard to talk about, and please, don't say year one was whatever, and then copy and paste and make year two the same thing and add 2 words to it. That's not showing growth. Typically speaking, if you're looking at a chart with the SAE description, what I used to glance at to see growth was, okay, year one had this much space, year two had more space, year three had more space. Okay, if you're just copying and pasting, if that judge is gonna then read it, then you're gonna realize they're not showing any growth, they're just copying and pasting the same thing over and over again, adding a few words to it. Be different every year. Every one of these needs to be a little bit different. To get that 6 points, then that needs to be different. We're starting to get into the meat of the Tootsie Roll pop now. This is not as much of the outside shell.
And if you have a kind of a varied SAE that you are doing a lot of different things that cause your SAE to fall into several different proficiency award categories, you need to enter those separately.
Yes.
You need to have several different SAE journal entries that you go and add hours to. And I'll give you an example of that. Well, the last couple of years, my state star candidates, Davis, Jackson, and Hunter Matthews, both of them were doing just all sorts of different things. But we had those hours broke down in AET, and it takes time to do that. But like, I remember on one of them, it was just operating power tools and equipment. And we broke down his SAE, how much time was spent operating power tools and equipment. And then one was on maybe equipment maintenance. How much time did you spend actually maintaining the equipment? And there was, we broke his SAE down into multiple categories and on both of those, so that some we could select for this proficiency award, others we selected for a different proficiency award. Because what we run into, what we see a lot of times, we see students on the committee, these will always get flagged, okay? Because it'll say farmhand, or, I don't know, whatever, Tally-Ho Farms is what the title will be up there. And then the description will include 14 different proficiency award areas, just like, I do this and 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 this, and then it's just hours, money. Well, that's great. This is a hard-working kid, but I can't tell how much of this is related to this SAE. So that 30 points that's coming in, that's just the SAE part, you're not going to get on the high area of that. At best, you're going to get in the middle, because your judge is confused. They don't know how much of this big giant SAE is actually related to that specific proficiency award area. They get flagged all the time. We always keep those in those award areas, but it hurts the score. It definitely hurts the score.
So, I have a question about that. So, let's use a livestock project, for example, on that. And you have an entrepreneurship project. So would you also break down the different things that you would do with those animals? For example, breeding and caring for babies versus show prep and training versus, you know, those different types of things.
If you want the most points, you absolutely should.
Yeah. You want to tell your story. Tell me what you learned, and that's what they're doing, basically. What did you learn? How did you grow? What skills do you have now that you didn't have before?
So those would then, like you said, you could select them for different proficiency areas.
Yes.
Or for different applications. So I guess you would just have to go in and look at the, well, I don't know, I mean, how would that,
So what I've done with my students is we sit down and talk about, okay, well, you know, how many hours are you working on a weekly basis? Okay, let's, you know, we'll go off of that a little bit. Okay, well, how much of that time on a percentage? What percent of your time do you think you spend doing this? What percent of your time do you think you spend doing this? How often do you do this? And then we break them down by task that way, and we put them in that way.
Now, yes.
Well, it's a different SAEs.
Yeah. On a
and
placement
different-
SAE, you can break that down into several different areas, and each one will have its own clipboard. And it gives you the opportunity, when you set it up, to break it down to
Yeah.
5 different ones.
That's what I.
well,
gotta
but like
figure out.
beef production is pretty much still gonna be beef production. I don't know that you can you break that up into, if I'm raising cows and also selling cows, do those go in separate categories, or is it just beef production?
It's just beef production, yeah, I mean, all that would still be beef production, but it would help your judges to understand if you have those tasks broke down into some.
When you wean those calves off,
Better
what are you doing then? Once those calves are weaned and ready to either sell or go back in the herd, how do you treat each group differently?
Yeah.
How much have they grown? What are they worth now?
I can see it throwing it into a different SAE category if then I had them processed and then I packaged and sold meat that was
Yeah.
USDA or something like that. That's then a whole different project. We would create a different project in the AET
Yeah.
for the second part of that, right?
But it would all still going to beef production, but it also could possibly.
So you would just select both projects whenever you're
Yeah.
trying to make your
You just
application.
pick
Yeah.
the box to select the box. Okay, here's what it looks like. This is the way, working an average of 20 hours of Tractor Supply. When I first hired, my duties were keep the shell. This tells you, I'm not gonna read it to you, y'all can all read. It tells a little bit about what happened next. Still working the 20 hours a week beginning in January. With the first year that we signed, helping customers in the credit department, got a little bit of a raise, told about that, told about what skills they have now that they didn't have before. And that's what one needs to look like.
Well, I think this one would score better if you had, broke it down into, inventory, sales.
Because it is a placement when you could actually break it down 5 ways.
Yeah, so where it just, because when I read Tractor Supply and just all this together, maybe they got it broke down somewhere else, but if it was broke down into tasks, into inventory, sales, whatever else they're doing, then you could really see the growth a lot better, because then the next year, they're probably gonna have a little bit more tasks. They're gonna have more responsibility at work because they've got a year of experience under their belt, and break it down even farther. That's what we try to do with ours, to make it clear that there's growth.
And this all came from the clipboard too, by the way. And the clipboard is a year-end evaluation of your project. Right? Okay.
So would you do that, I'm sorry, let me go back, would you do that with percentages, like you said, 70% of my time was spent doing inventory or whatever?
Or
And that's
some
it?
are hours, you can do it either way.
Yeah, we do. I just talked to them about, it's so hard to get kids to really tell you their story. You have to interview
Yeah.
them. You have to drill them sometimes and figure out exactly what it is you're looking for. But, once we kind of figure out how many hours a week they're spending doing certain tasks, then we just total up the hours and put them in there. And we make sure we don't count our hours twice. But yeah, you can kind of do it either way on that.
I've taken a couple of workshops in Texas from a guy that has had a bunch of national winners. And he interviews his kids when they come in class. First, when they're ninth graders, each kid has to come up to his desk and they sit down and do an interview, talk about what their SAE is and where it's going and how many hours they're working and all that kind of stuff. So he gets to know all his kids. Well, he says, I'm gonna come up there and say, and it maybe works with him a little bit to get some. He said he had one kid that came up, did his interview, and they were working on his SAE and all that kind of stuff. And one day he came in and said, hey, I got to leave already today because I got to go to the ranch. He said, you used to live right over here. Why? He said, well, it's 3 hours to the ranch. And it turns out he had another ranch that they'd never told him about in the interview, that was an exotic animal ranch that this kid helped run, and he ended up being a national winner based on that SAE that he never even told him about. He said, if I hadn't, he said, I just missed that when he came back to the interview. But he interviews every kid that he's got. And I always try to get to know my kids so I would know what they had, but I never went through the interview process. And I think that's
I do something similar. I've got a Google form that I have my students fill out several times throughout the year. It's usually at the beginning of the year. It's just an SAE inventory form, basically, where I've got several different SAE categories listed on there and check all that apply, about how many hours a week did you work during the summertime, you know, what are your interests, and it has some FFA questions on there too. But I look at that, and I have all my students do it, and I can tell who's already working on significant hours on different SAEs. And it also, you know, tells me who wants to be interested in some of the FFA teams and stuff like that later on in the year. I wish that AET would incorporate something a little bit more like that, that was very user-friendly for the kids, where they could just go through and click, and then we could pull up and see what kind of SAE they already have, rather than all the steps it takes to input an SAE and AET. But anyways, I do that on Google Forms, so I've got all their SAEs documented in my Google Forms throughout the year. And then the ones who have really good SAEs, those are the ones we take the next step with. But I will say this year, we got to filling out state degrees, and so I'm sitting down with those kids that were in my advanced ag class. All of them have been in my class at least 3 years to be eligible, you know, so I'm sitting down talking to them. Okay, let's put this in, let's make sure you're eligible for your state degree. And I had 2, maybe 3, I remember I called you and I was like, we could have filled out more proficiency awards. These kids have been holding back on me, you know, they
won't tell you. They think, everybody does that.
Yeah, I mean, I have one kid that, he's worked, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 hours a year the last couple of years for tent tech, which I don't know if that would have been a good proficiency application or not. Probably could have been design and fabrication or something, because he was, you know, putting up those tents all over the place and doing all kinds of stuff with them and doing some repair and maintenance over there too. And he plays soccer in the band. I knew he was working. I had no idea he was working that much, you know. But some of these kids, you have to talk to them to know what they're doing outside of school.
One of the things that when I do AET symposium with real people who actually know what to do, they will say, okay, we're working on a veterinary clinic, what all are you doing at that clinic? And they will divide it, they'll take that placement proficiency and say, okay, let's say that you do a little welding farm on some pins or something like that. Well, that's ag mechanics, how much of your day is spent doing ag mechanics? And they will divide it up that way so that it all falls in there so that you're really telling that story. And that's what this is all about, telling the story. My wife spends hours on these things, getting all the motion, all of that.
She deserved her honorary state degree.
She did.
She's done a lot more.
We'll tell you what, I could never do this without her. I heard she does it.
See, so this is the category that I would approach down instead of just practice.
Yeah. It would tell the story a little bit better. Okay. Okay. Entrepreneurship, both of them count 16 points. Everything counts the same, but entrepreneurship is broken down differently than placement. There's a lot more, you get a lot more swings for your money in entrepreneurship. You still get the same 16 points, which is,
You have to make sure you put inventory in.
yeah.
Where's the point breakdown? I feel like I've seen that somewhere, but I
Yeah,
haven't.
we did the last time we did, I think the one breakdown is on here.
Is it on the AET? Is it on?
Yes, it is in, you pick them on the rubric from AET.
Oh.
If you'll click on the, blue ribbon, it tells you, it will tell you, it'll show you the rubric and tell you the point breakdown. And I'm an Andy Griffith fan, so there's a lot of Ernest T. Bass references in there.
So in your entrepreneurship, your descriptions are basically, it's the same sort of thing. It's just your description is not worth quite as many points
Right.
in entrepreneurship as it is in placement. But you should still break it down by task if you can. Be as specific as you can.
Details, details, details. That's what everything is based on details. Okay, significant growth. It can be in skills, it can be in numbers of animals, it can be in sales. We're not going to show hours on a entrepreneurship application, but you can show growth in skills.
So, what do you do if you have a student who doesn't have, has a big year, their sophomore year, and then their junior year, they actually do less sales or make less money, work less hours? What do you do? Well, you gotta show that growth in some of the things that they learned and some of the skills that they have, and tell the judges why. I've actually had 2 state winners that went backwards in some of their actual numbers. I had one in goat production. Well, he told why. The reason why is he started out with a bunch of boar goats. Well, he figured out pretty quickly he didn't like boar goats. They kept getting sick. He was constantly having to worm them, and they were just looking for a place to die, all that kind of stuff. And he got tired of raising boar goats, and so his second year of his SAE, his goat herd went from, I think, 23 or something like that down to 13, 14. And then his third year, it kind of went back up again. But if you looked at it on paper, it looked like he started higher than even where he finished. But he told the reason why is because he had started with those boar goats and built up a herd, and he didn't like them. And he ended up starting an intensive culling program. He culled a lot of his boar goats and started getting some brush goats that were a lot hardier and could deal with less maintenance. And he kind of became a lot more selective in his processes. Well, because he told the reasons why, it didn't hurt him. He actually scored well. And I had a student this year, well, state star in placement, Hunter Matthews. Hunter, in 2020, if you look at his applications, in 2020, Hunter worked a ton. 2021, he worked a whole lot too. Well, the reason why is because of COVID. We were out of school. And he's a pre-sport athlete. And so when we were out of school and they weren't practicing near as much, his whole operation is there where he lives. I mean, it's literally in his backyard. And so he was working nearly full time during that time. Because why not, you know? And so we told that in his application because his hours went down after 2021. But it's because we were back in school and everything was back practicing wide open again, and you know, he had other obligations. And so just make sure if your hours do go down or if your money does go down, just tell the reasons why, and then show growth in your skills and responsibilities. And that's usually pretty easy to do because these kids, whatever they're doing, they're going to be learning new things. And you know, if they're any good at what they're doing, then they're going to have more responsibilities put on their shoulders. And so just show growth that way.
I judged nationally one year, and the girl worked at the alligator farm. Her started out as a secretary, and then she decided that she wanted to go out and help them gather the alligator eggs. So she would gather alligator, and she had a whole bunch of hours one year, and then the next year her hours went way down, and she explained that it flooded that year, and they couldn't gather as many eggs, and she didn't have it. She ended up choosing national winner. So it was, you just got to explain what you're doing. Growth in diversification and responsibilities, and engagement. And what that means is, are you becoming part of that project? Is that your project that you take on? I think, you know, Andrew does, these kids do a great job of engaging in that project. I want to say thank you.
We're going to send her the video so she can see.
Yeah,
you
what,
break the
same
law.
thing drinking water.
Just gonna say on the video.
I'll get you another one.
This is a little bit about Ernest T's little project that he had, and the way he breaks it down, and it's thank you. It's a pretty good way to do it, and we've only got so many characters on this, so you've got to make your characters count. Make sure that when you get it, it'll show growth in skills and in hours as well, or skills and money or whatever. Revenue and expenses. This when I started getting interested in entrepreneurship, this is the place I started right here. On revenue, financial records, revenue, all that kind of stuff. That's what I learned first. And it's not all that many points, but by the time you add it all up, it becomes a lot more. AET won't let you mess up. I mean, it used to be you had to do this a certain way, but AET is not going to let you mess up. So it's not near as hard to do. Put your money in, and make sure if it's an entrepreneurship, you've got expenses. If you don't have expenses, it's not an entrepreneurship, it's a hobby.
Yeah, they really want to see your operating income percentage in around 20%.
Yeah.
It's kind of ideal.
Yep.
But if you're above 50%, then a good judge is going to start looking for the reasons why. It's okay to be above 50%, but you better explain somewhere why or how, because that's kind of uncommon.
Yep.
But of course you do want to be on the positive side,
Yep.
but it should never be 100% or over 100%.
Yeah, I've
It's
seen
just
them,
not-
115, 120%.
It's just not not reasonable. And if you are somehow, then you better explain why. What was it, the young man that was in the Agri-Science Star, the National Star, that had sold a cow for $150,000?
Yeah, he was American Star, and he was in the dairy business, and he had done well, and then I got the line 4H is supposed to be a negative number or zero. No, his line 4H had this huge positive number, and so when I was doing the interview, I asked him what had happened. He had, one of his cows that had a heifer calf, and he had started showing this calf, and this, big dairy from, it had won several championships. Big dairy from, Canada that hardly ever buys any from anybody, offered him $125,000 for the heifer. And of course, it's over. And that, because that was.
That changes your records a little
Yeah,
bit.
changes your records. When, consider it, and he explained it. I enjoy the interview part because you meet some really big kids, young people, by the time I get to them, they're 21, 22 years old.
Chip, I can mention one thing for the younger teachers. They used to go out on site with all of them. You
Yeah.
remember those days.
Mhm.
I do too, because we're old, but that's the way they used to do it. Our
Yeah.
district people would go out and interview all the kids.
And Jack Harris and I have been on a campaign to interview the four top ones in each one to see. We can interview them by Zoom. You don't have, there was Zooms. That's the thing, that's one thing COVID gave us was Zoom. So if I'm interviewing a kid, I can tell a lot more about what they're doing than just reading that paper. I know when we were at the state convention, I interviewed, Will Johnson, girl that does the pig. Alex, yeah. She knows everything. I mean, you can't throw one by her. And I said, I noticed everybody else has a tripod over, but yours is flat. Kevin, why you did that? She said, well, that's because I think it gives it a more professional look, and I can take my tables and move them like I want them to be. Yeah. I mean, she's very, very impressive young lady. I had never met her, and that's the reason I went up there. I helped her a time or two. She called, helping years ago before it got started.
Chip,
Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this. Did you set up Zoom interviews early in the year when they're, like in the fall before they get ready to do their proficiency, to give them pointers on how to build up to it before they're due?
I think I have done that, yes.
I know you have.
Yeah.
But I just wanted our people on here to know that that's doable.
Yes,
I mean, we can help them along the way to build up to it.
yes.
And then they don't have to backtrack and do all those things.
Yep, and I'd be glad to do that. It's easy to Zoom and easy to, I can see anything you're doing from my house. So if you need me to look at your proficiency application, give me a call. I can put it up and look at anything you're doing, give you some tips on, hey, add this much to it, or take that away, that kind of stuff. Okay, this is what it looks like. Here's line 4H right here. Line 4H is normally a negative number because it's non-current inventory. You are actually selling off part of your herd, is basically, or part of your flock or whatever.
I have a question.
Huh?
So when your application populates from the records that you've put in, the majority of what it brings over is just numbers, hours, things like that. All the writing and the descriptions and all that are gonna come from when you fill them out in the application,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Well,
So-
your descriptions pull
Yeah.
from AET,
Yeah,
Okay.
all your descriptions.
from the clipboard.
From the clipboard, okay. And that's where it shows the year down the side and you put your
Yeah,
description
what
of
that
that.
is a year-end evaluation.
Okay, so those pull over.
Yeah.
Which
Um,
I've always wondered, like, when you go into the journal, when you first set up that SAE, there's like a whole big paragraph that you're supposed to type in right
Yeah,
there. I thought that pulled over for a long time, but it does not, that goes
Okay.
nowhere.
Anything that does not have a character count on it will not work. So that's
So
an
you
easy
have
way
to
to
put it in
know.
on the footnotes.
Okay.
If it's got a
So-
character count, it's gonna pull.
So the description, because it forces kids to fill out that description to get that check mark
Uh-huh.
on the little pencil or whatever.
Yep.
So that's important, but not necessarily for the application.
Right, we look at that on state books.
Right,
That's
okay.
got to be done and stuff. Now, if you don't wanna, I can tell this, but, you know, you copy and paste and put it down there. And once you get it copied and pasted, it's gonna give you the green pencil check.
Yeah.
You don't have to fill anything out.
Well, I always tell my kids to copy and paste what's applicable to you,
Yes,
because all of that stuff is not always applicable to each one. So they may do this line or that line, and then they fill it in.
yeah, yeah, that's what you need to do.
Yep.
All right, a lot of people have a misconception of current and non-current inventory.
Me.
Current inventory means it's gonna last a year. It's consumable. Or it's going to be something you're gonna transfer in to make it non-current inventory later on. Non-current's gonna be weak. Non-current inventory's cows, pigs, and sheep, they're all non-current inventory. Now, when you start working in market manager and beef herd manager or herd manager, you're gonna move current inventory to non-current inventory. Now, and the reason somebody always, well, why aren't you just putting in non-current inventory chart out? I've got a heifer calf, I've got 3 heifers over here that I've been showing. And I'm gonna keep them. Nobody's ever gonna buy those heifers. I won't put them, why don't I just put them in my herd to start out with? Because they can't gain any value in you. Once you move them to non-current inventory, they can't increase in value. If you put them in current inventory, they can increase in value. And they can increase in value by however much you want them to increase in value. They will automatically increase in value every time you feed them. Because it will take that feed and divide it up. You've got 3, and you spent $200 on feed, it'll divide 3 into 200, and each one of those heifers will increase by that much money. Every time you vaccinate, each one of them's going to increase by that much money. But let's say you show them and heifer A has won 3 shows, heifer B has won 5 shows, and heifer C has not won any. Okay, well, heifer C is probably not going to be worth as much. So you can sell, or you can increase the value of those 2 heifers when they move into the cow herd, or you can move all 3 in the cow herd, and C is just not worth as much as the other 2. You can say, okay, well, if I sold this thing, I could get $4,000. So that value on there. Now, horses are notorious for being high value. They're barrel racing horses. Every kid that's got a barrel racing horse got a $10,000 barrel. They pay $42 for it, it's $14,000. Doesn't matter. And that's perfectly all right, but it puts you in the hole. If you've got a horse, when you move it over there, it's like you bought it. So you want to be careful and reasonable about the amount that you increase the value. Make it a reasonable amount that animal you could actually get for that animal. See what I'm saying? You look confused.
Okay, so, all right, so we've got kids that show,
Mhm.
and like my child, I guess you y'all, okay. So we keep one of those gilts she showed this year, we transferred that into a
You go from market manager into
To the breeding.
herd manager.
herd manager. Okay, so what if she goes and buys a bred sow, but you're saying if we put it in non-current inventory, then we're keeping it, it's gonna,
Okay, if she buys a bred sow, it would go in non-current inventory.
okay.
This is breeding animal.
Yeah.
And it's breeding.
Only you keep them up here if you're showing them.
Okay.
Basically, once they reach maturity, or,
You're done showing.
then you put them
Yeah.
and non-current.
Yeah, what's that?
Sell it,
or
slaughter
sell
it, or move it to,
Yeah,
You
but
can
once
just
that-
sell it,
Once that
or you
red
can
sow
move it
fails,
here.
then those pigs are going to the market manager.
They'll go into market.
Market manager, so that they can gain value. You can sell them out of market manager, or you can move them back into your cattle. You make a promise.
I just need, I need to listen to myself, I think, on this. The other question is, I've been told two different things on like the show animals, that you need to put them in there individually as separate SAEs, like each animal separately?
You can, that's one way to do it.
Okay, because I've been told both ways. I've been told, some people say you've got to do it that way, and I've heard that they're like, wow, that'd be, and I agree, it's crazy, because then you never go in every animal every day and say, I fed, I've watered, I've whatever.
we've never done it that way. We've always done 2023 show string, and those
Yeah,
animals were listed.
that's a perfectly legitimate way to do it.
Okay.
Because your animals are individualized.
But you're gonna list them individually.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and just call them your SAE show string, is what I would do.
And in your inventory, for your judges, don't just put a number. Like, there were some this year that got flagged. We know what it is as soon as we see it. Okay, so it's not gonna hurt with us, just gonna move it back as soon as the committee sees it. But some of your judges don't understand when they see those numbers, that those are your tag numbers or whatever. So
Identify them up there where it says.
make sure that they know, like, that this is, like, I don't know, but Cal 146 or whatever,
You
instead
can
of.
do
Tag
it.
143.
Yeah.
And you do that through the little graph in your, journal. There's a little graph on the end right there. If you're carrying over animals in your current inventory, put them in that little graph and identify them as your Duroc sow or Duroc ewe. And tag number so-and-so. And it will actually put it in parentheses and identify it for you. And don't
That'll
just
help
put
you,
tag
your
numbers.
judges, because, well, you gotta remember, with some of our judges, and we have good judges, but some of them come from a lot of different backgrounds. Hardly any of us are truly general ag, where we know a little bit about everything. We got a lot of ag teachers that are kind of horticultural specialists, some of them are livestock specialists. Well, if you're a livestock specialist, you're probably gonna have a lot of kids filling out livestock proficiency awards, which means you can't judge livestock proficiency awards. So then we assign you horticulture. Well, you're not a horticulture person, so, if you're filling out horticulture, fill it out so that a judge who is not a horticulture person can understand it. Same thing with livestock. If you're filling out livestock, fill it out where someone who's not a livestock person will know everything that you're talking about.
So show swine would go in there.
Because that,
Okay, shows one.
I think it's gonna help you score better
Okay.
if you do it that way.
If you're showing them, they're marketable. Even though you're not planning on selling.
Now, one thing that I've struggled with on these two is, I've had some students with entrepreneurship projects that are like vegetable gardens. I mentioned Alex Lee earlier. He's awesome. He's a great kid. He sells stuff at the farmer's market, and he makes flower bouquets, and he's got a YouTube channel about horticulture, and his garden is not just a little bitty garden. It's a big, acre and a half thing. But it's hard to come up with a lot of inventory for a garden. So, we usually end up with like seed here and struggle with stuff to come up with here because the tractor belongs to that. But, some things are gonna have more inventory than others. And, we started in his kind of, trying to explain in there the reason why he didn't have a lot of inventory is there's just not a lot of things in a garden that carry over year to year to year.
If you don't have non-current inventory, just explain why you don't have it in that performance review A. I don't have a tractor because my dad has a tractor and I use his. To get used to the tractor, I water my time, this.
Yeah, that's the other thing you can do is put it in there as a labor exchange barter, on some of that stuff.
And listed in
That
AET
helps.
is labor exchange part. That's perfectly fine. Okay, learning outcomes and efficiencies. Now, 4 or more responses reflected your essay. A lot of people are just, you gotta have at least 4. A lot of people put 4. You put 4, I have a hard time giving you 20 points, or how many other points is worth. I want to say 5, and most judges want to say 5.
You get full points, put as much in there as you can, so put 5.
And make them measurable, they have got to be measurable.
One thing I was doing a few years ago, is I was putting them in as beginner, and then, I don't remember, like medium, moderate, whatever, and then advanced or whatever on my efficiencies. A lot of people do that, but it's not as measurable as putting some numbers in there. So, I started going to more along the lines of whatever the efficiency is. When they started, they had 0 hours experience or just a few hours experience. And then, now they've got 300 or 400 hours plus of experience on that particular efficiency factor. Or the number of plants that they planted in their garden. They started with, 0 or very low number. Now they've planted over 400 plants and tended over 400 plants. So that's more measurable, putting a number there, some way. Sometimes you have to be creative with how you're gonna make it measurable, but if you can make it measurable, it'll help the score.
And a lot of times, people will change as they go down through there on those 5. People want to stick with it. If you're gonna use numbers all the way. If you're gonna use beginner and advanced, beginner and advanced all the way, but explain what a beginner is somewhere along the way. If they don't know what a beginner is, and they don't know what an advanced is, the percentages will work. A lot of them, I can do this job at 80% efficiency now, I can only do it at 30% efficiency. And I've heard judges say, well, how do you know you can do 80%? That's something else.
Kind of seems arbitrary.
Yep.
A lot of people skip those. I can't tell you how many applications I've judged where somebody just put 1 in there just to get it to say met at the end. And, you're leaving a lot of points on the table. You only put 1 in there.
This is the meat of the whole one. This is the center of the Tootsie Roll pop here. We're talking big points.
And also make sure that each one of those factors is related to that SAE project in that proficiency award category. Because if you're filling out multiple categories, you only have to put in 5 of those and you can select them for each category. But they're not going to fit each category. And your judges are not gonna score you as well if you've got 5 efficiency factors in there. 3 of them are related to livestock, 1 of them is related to ag sales, and 1 of them is related to ag mechanics, repair and maintenance, or something like that. Well, if you're gonna submit in all 3 of those categories, you need 5 for ag mechanics, repair and maintenance, you need 5 for ag sales, and you need 5 for livestock. And so, a lot of people make that mistake of once they've got 5 of them in there, they say, okay, well, that's good enough, and they move on. If you're gonna submit in multiple categories, it needs to be a different application in each category, and everything in that application needs to relate back to that category.
Andrew would tell me that before he would, by the time he'd get to this part right here, he was so tired of messing with it, sometimes he wouldn't do as good a job on it. So this year he started with this.
Yeah.
And that's probably a
That's
pretty
what-
good idea.
After, we started doing, we did this workshop 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And it became really apparent to me how important those skills and efficiency factors are. And I'm like, okay, now let's start with that. Let's make sure that that is good. That can't be just a throwaway.
Afterthought,
It's
yeah.
worth way too much for us.
Okay, SCK is skills, competency, and knowledge. This is the most difficult part to me because it's changed some, and you gotta pick them from this standard, you pick from this standard, then, remember, it says clearly applies to the project being held in the application. If it doesn't clearly apply, you're gonna lose points.
Needs to apply, it needs to be measurable. But make sure that you got them in your primary pathway, and that's whatever primary pathway you select at the beginning, that's your primary pathway.
Plant systems,
And
animal
then
systems.
those 2, 6, and 7, those can be anything, whatever you want them to be. They can be from animal systems, they can be from plant systems, they can be from career and cluster, they can be from anything across the board.
And notice what it says right here. If the standard doesn't apply to the project or the activity described isn't related to the selected standard, 0 points will apply. Well, 1 or 2 is 0, the entire standard is 0. That's so important.
And then these, remember, they have to be career ready and cluster, so you don't want to use all of those up here, and, because you gotta do those down here. And, don't select the same, it will let you,
Yeah, it'll let you select
but
the
don't
same one.
select the same one every time. I graded one this year, I can't remember if it was one that we had flagged or if it was one that was, I actually graded. But, I think it was one that I actually graded. That was, they selected the same standard like 5 different times. And they were writing different paragraphs about it every time. But I couldn't give them the same amount of credit as if they had selected a different standard for every one of those times. So it's like, okay, we get it, you met that standard. How about these others? You know, you're supposed to meet 10, not, 6. And so I think it's important that you select a different one each time. And then it needs to, what you write about needs to relate back to that standard. And it also needs to relate to your SAE, and it also needs to be measured. It'll be all 3 of those things. Because I've read some where it's like, okay, well, this has absolutely nothing to do with the standard you selected. And, we got kids like that, right? They just select this one and they'll start talking about something totally different. But you gotta make sure it relates to that. And then I've read some that's like, okay, this is great, it relates to your standard. It's got nothing to do with this project. Maybe it's got something to do with your other SAE. It doesn't have anything to do with this one for this proficiency award.
We have no way of knowing what your other SAE is.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at this one, I can't tell what everything else is. And then some of them are just, they just talk a lot, use up all the characters, but there's nothing measurable in there. It doesn't, I try to do things like put in June I did this. I did this particular skill working on these specific machines, or, with this number of plants. Make it measurable, put a number in there, put a date in there, put something in there that makes it more like a smart goal.
If you don't get anything else in this workshop, get measurable. Because measurable is the key to everything that you do. If it's not measurable, you're not going to school. Here's a little example of what to do. Activity description.
I just like, that caught my attention as soon as I looked up at it. Got a number in there. I'm one of those judges. I'm looking for a number.
That's what I look for. I look for a number. I don't care whether I'm doing national chapter or efficiencies or whatever. I'm looking for a number. Notice the whole bio remediation. Did you put that in there? I said, what's bio remediation? Remediate it. Bio remediation encompasses composting. Notice this description clearly shows the applicant performing the standard. I want to know, are you just writing more stuff in, or are you really doing?
I feel like the way that they've got this broken down, the rubric now, makes it even harder to get those points.
Yeah.
Before, it was kind of all together. You're looking at all these skills as a whole. And so I felt like if you had one or two that were a little bit weak on your paragraphs or your descriptions or whatever, but you had several that were strong, those strong ones kind of carried you, I feel like. Now, it's really breaking them down, each one, and it's harder to get your points.
Photos, the old safety photos, brand new. This year's the first year we had safety photos.
You got an old application, look back and make sure your first two photos are safe. And say something about safety in the description.
Of course, this off the internet, this is just an example on what a safety photo could look like.
You should have been wearing long pants.
Yep, should be wearing long pants. Yeah, he does have clothes so he uses them. David brought out the long pants, I mean, he jumped right out.
And, I've tried to make mine where they have some kind of PPE on in their safety photo. But then, you kind of run into, what do you do for a safety photo for, service learning, What do you do for a safety photo for
Education.
Yeah, ag communications. It's like, I feel like this one fits your ag mechanics repair and maintenance, your ag mechanics design fabrication,
Livestock.
all your livestock, support areas. It fits in all that. It's a little bit different when you're, harvesting vegetables or, whatever. But we came up with some things, where safe practices using pesticides and herbicides, that sort of thing. Safe practices in harvesting and handling. But I think it's more so important for those, especially more so the description than the picture. You could just be out there picking a tomato, but, explain why that's being done safely, on some of those.
Yeah.
But now, on the ones where it is a ag mechanics or turf grass or whatever, then they need to be in some kind of PPE, in the picture. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
What could you do for the ones that are, I don't even remember what we did. What, for Paisley's. I've got,
Is ag communications, when you said that, I was thinking, I had to take some, stupid class for my master's degree, a couple of years ago. I can't remember something about being responsible online, there's a term for it. Y'all remember what it's called?
Yes.
Yes, digital citizenship. There you go.
Digital citizenship.
so what's the picture of that?
But it don't matter what's in the picture, just talk
Picture of
about
the
it.
kid on the computer.
Yeah, talk about digital citizenship.
Yeah, I know, I just think that's silly for the ones.
It is, it doesn't fit all across the board.
No, it's not.
They made it across the board, but it really doesn't fit across the board. in my
And they
opinion.
may change it, you can't never tell, they change. And by the way, always check your Proficiency Award handbook and your National Chapter Award handbook in January for changes, because that's when they post it. From them, or me, not them.
He always tells me what they are.
They just, it's just random, they just, bam, won't change it. And they're gonna change this year, so you need to check. Or call me.
So do you get notified when they're changed?
They send me a letter saying this is gonna change right here. Share it with your state staff and make sure that they all know and that kind of stuff. Jennifer actually said it to me this time, they said it to her.
Well, I like the addition of the safety thing this year. I felt like that gave the kids another,
Yeah.
you know,
I think it's good
opportunity to
for-
show and talk about some stuff.
At least like 75% of them, it's a good thing.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
said-
well, I had a poultry proficiency, so
Yeah,
that was easy.
but you have to, you're talking about, you were right about the 12 chickens. Of course, you started out with 24, but a fox got in there.
Yeah,
And the
well, when Gage walked out, I asked him, I said, so who beats you? And he was like, a girl with 12 chickens. I was like,
Yeah, she started out.
And I thought the same thing you thought. I said, we are up against, you know, every poultry farm in the state right now with a high school kid. This is gonna be hard to do, but I was proud with what he ended up with. I would have liked to have seen how it could have improved his application, but.
I started learning that lesson when I was still at Brewer. I never submitted a proficiency award in high school. Kevin Williams never submitted any that I know of during his time at Douglas. Maybe, I think Josh Williams might have submitted one or two, something like that, while Kevin was there. But there was hardly any, so I didn't have the background in it. So I just had to learn as I went. And when I was at Brewer, I was learning some, and I learned that when I had a kid that won poultry one year. His name was Jacob Falk. And Jacob would just kind of manage their family farm, but he did a lot of the important tasks, like feed inventories and stuff like that, and he had a lot of responsibility. And we talked about all that in his application, that he was out there taking feed inventories and doing this different type of stuff. Well, he beat a kid from Danville that had like 12 chicken houses, and a much bigger farm. And that's kind of when it started clicking with me, and hey, this is really about the details and learning. It's about proficiency. It's not, you know, the most money application. And I feel like if more people understood that, then they would write these applications a lot differently.
Yeah, and really, what are we about but growing a kid and teaching them how to grow 12 or 14 chickens, or, you know, they're learning. And show heifers, 3 or 4 show heifers, they're not going, you know, it's unrealistic to think that a kid's gonna have 12 chicken houses.
And it's really, it makes it fair. If you think about it, some people say, well, that's not fair. How could somebody with this little operation beat somebody with a much bigger operation? Well, no, you're thinking about it wrong, because we want each kid to have an equal opportunity to do well in these. We want each kid to grow, and some students are just kind of born with a lot more opportunity than others, because you grow up on a really big farm and stuff like that. So,
I had Randall, I mean, you
yeah.
don't get much for it.
The only way to keep it a level playing field is to make it about growth and learning, and not so much about the amount of money that they make.
Yeah, it's gotta be about the kid. And that's starting to really show up now, even on national level. The big operations are not, they're not winning as much as they used
Pictures. Whoops. Go ahead, so.
Yeah.
Twice. Now let it develop. That one's good, good design, I mean, good picture, good description.
to. And here's my all-time favorite picture. Chicken Red. National judging, these pictures had actually won state.
Not in Alabama.
Not in Alabama. Kid's standing there, he's got old Red under his arm. Here's me and Red, about to go in the fair. That was his dad. Here's me, same picture. Here's me and Red in the fair. And he goes on, and he has the more chickens, and then he has him and Red in a big old tub full of cold water. He said, here I am washing Red, and he's dunking old Red down in that water. And this will make his feathers grow thicker. Chicken Red has been, it's been 12 years I've used Chicken Red now. It's my 12th year to do this job.
We've actually seen worse pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Even here in our own state. There was one that was one of my favorites a couple of years ago that was Pig D. I was grading swine, and it was, here's my Pig D. And it was funny how Pig D started in looking one way, and then the next picture, he just looked like a different pig.
Yeah, grew a big old set of ears.
We grew a giant set of ears for that second picture, you know. And then the third picture, it looked like Pig D was in the jungles of Vietnam in some sort of weird enclosure. And then in the fourth picture, it was Pig D was on a concrete floor.
Nice pen.
Yeah, really upgraded
Yeah.
his pen. And, you know, drinking out of a nice, you know, nipple water and all that kind of stuff. And then, I can't remember what the last picture was.
Last picture, was it like a pig feed?
Oh, yeah, it's like a pig feed that was off the internet,
This is
obviously.
what pig eats.
All of
Pig
them,
eats.
all of them were off the internet. It was just, you know, I don't know if there ever was a pig feed.
Right.
But, they just had a bunch of pictures off the internet. But that was here in Alabama, and we've seen a pretty good bit of that.
Oh, yeah.
One kid this year, didn't they just put, I didn't have
Yeah.
any pictures, so I Googled these?
Yeah. That was easy to grade.
Yeah, at least they were honest and made it real easy.
So does that automatically kick them out?
Yeah, that's just
Okay.
an automatic
Yeah.
disqualification.
That disqualifies the whole.
Saves time on scoring, I guess.
Yeah.
I need
That was the first one we've ever had to, I didn't have the pictures, so I just Googled this.
I need you to send me pictures so I can put them on my site, because I need some pictures.
Well, yeah, one I looked at last year, I'm like, goodness, this landscape just looks a lot like the hills of Australia. Like, it does not look like Alabama at all. And, of course, it was like, it was cows grazing on the hillside, and it was a nursery operations, proficiency. So it was, like, it wasn't going anywhere anyways, but it's funny sometimes to look at the pictures on some of the really bad applications.
And we had one that had a picture of this girl in there and said, hi, my name is so-and-so, and here, this is about my operation. I thought, well, that's not a bad place to start. Somebody called me and said, have you looked at that one? And I said, well, yeah, just have seen. They said, well, use this app off your phone. It was the girl from Farm Her. And before the whole episode was on Farm Her, and of course, they used a different name, but that got that one disqualified, and off of that.
Make
So
sure
with
they
that
are your
one-
own pictures.
Would that one be the good one on the left? It's not landscape. Are they always supposed to be landscape? I
Yes.
thought that's what I
Yes.
heard.
It
Okay.
needs to be.
So that's the only thing
That's all right,
against that.
that's, that came off an application.
Okay.
It's an old application, and it was before they started really
I got you.
insisting on being landscape. That would be what, that's a good point, though. Glad you brought that out. Now, Chicken Red is landscape.
And the photos, that's another one of those things that it's not worth a whole lot of points, but it can gain you kind of some hidden points, because if your descriptions and your photos are really good, then it helps to kind of explain your SAE, and that judge is probably gonna give you more points on your SAE because they feel like they understand what you're doing from
That's
those
the first
pictures
thing I
or
look
those
at,
descriptions.
I flip to the photos right off the bat, and then I look, from there, I look at, I wanna know what that application's gonna be about. And that's the first thing I look at. And use those captions to tell your story. Don't tell me what's in the picture. Like Chicken Red's thing, more chicken. Don't tell me that. Tell me something about your, use it, tell me something I don't already know.
And then, on the supplemental, that was more than one page,
Yes.
last year, now it's back to just one page.
It's back to one page, or you can submit your record book with it. The national judges would rather see a record book, because you put a whole bunch of pictures in that record book, they go through there and look and find your whole story.
You
And-
can also put letters of recommendation
Yep.
and the resume in that record book,
Yep,
right?
yep, it'll have a whole bunch of stuff where you run out of space on your, just a supplemental page. If you've got a good record book, I would say attach that record book. You can do it, it's an either or, you can't do both. And I would say attach the record book if you've got a good record book.
One thing I worry about on the record book is, what about the stuff that we have kind of backdated and put in later and things like that? Are the judges going to really get you on that, or?
You're not supposed to, on a national judge ruling, you're not supposed to penalize them for backdating, because that's just one of those things that everybody does. It does show you how many days they backdated, how many times they backdated. It tells you the whole story. And I guess if there were two that were real close together, and you were having issues on, especially on American Star, something like that, the backdating might come into play. On a proficiency application, the backdating should not. Because you're gonna, everybody's gonna backdate.
Well, I mean, unless you do everything the day you do it, everything's
Yeah.
backdated.
Well,
Yeah, I recommend every week.
I would rather backdate on mine, honestly, because when I have my students put it in there, inevitably it's wrong. They forget to check something somewhere, and rather than it going into one SAE, it gets split up into 4 or something like that. And so I would rather my students keep up with their SAE journals through my Google Forms I send them. And then when it gets time for us to put it in AET, for us to sit down together and put it in there, so that, because unless it's one that's just keeping up with their journals just because, but if they're actually gonna fill out a proficiency award, I want to help them put that information in there, because I know what's gonna pull the AET, I know what needs to go where. It's so hard to get the students to understand. I mean, it took me 5 years to understand it. It's not the most user-friendly platform. It took me forever to understand where to put everything and get it to look a certain way to where it would score well. So I want to sit down with them, put things in. So,
There's an art to it,
Yeah.
to know how to do it. I know somebody was calling me that wanted to run for district office, and said, could you look at her journal entries? She's just got all the journal entries. She just journals every day. You say like, my cousins came over for breakfast this morning. No, I don't care about that. Tell me what you're doing, what you're learning. And it have a whole bunch of, I had a nice ride on my horse this morning. That's not helping your program. That's not helping you learn. Your journal stuff that's important, you don't have to journal every day. Journal what's important and tell your story. I think it's much more important than doing it every day than to tell your story of what you got.
So for people with animals, I mean, do they need to journal at all that they're feeding daily, or they spent 15 minutes today feeding, or?
It's just gonna, it's gonna give you, it's gonna get those hours, but entrepreneurship hours don't flow over. The only, what's important is the football. When you're in football, that's what all you.
So-
to answer your question, that's more for your use as an advisor
Yes.
than it is for
Yeah,
proficiency.
it's not going anywhere.
So if you want them to for your chapter, and, then
And state
absolutely.
degree hours, I
Yeah,
guess?
then
Well,
absolutely.
even state degree hours for entrepreneurship are not gonna flow over.
What do you mean flow over?
In other words, if you're feeding every day, at the end of the year, you've got 1,000 hours that you fed. gonna show up. Not gonna show up anyway.
But I mean, it won't count towards your state degree? So.
It's the amount of money on an entrepreneur.
Yeah, entrepreneurship's all
okay.
money.
Yeah.
Now, if you're working, if you are getting paid, those paycheck hours are what's gonna show up. The journal hours that you put in there are not gonna show up. They will show up in skills. Now, that skill hour, if you do a skill and put the hours in there, that's gonna show up.
So if you're under the entrepreneurship category, you better be making enough money to get your state degree.
Yep.
Unless you wanna put it in as entrepreneurship on one side and unpaid placement on, put it in supplementary.
Unpaid placement hours are gonna show up.
That's the other thing. Like, if you had a kid that worked a ton of hours, didn't make a lot of money, I'd put them in, and I was trying to get them a state degree, I'd put them in as unpaid placement rather than entrepreneurship.
Right, for
To get
instance,
them credit for the
she's
hours.
working for y'all put those hours in as unpaid placement. But she needs unpaid placement and barter, you have to keep them separated. Because you technically barter and pay her. So just keep your unpaid placement hours over here, the entrepreneurship project over here, but you can qualify by the hours of unpaid placement. And then later on, when it starts making money, then that would go for American.
This is a lot.
All clear as mud, right? It's, here's back to the Tootsie Roll Pop, and just, again, how much each part counts. Just, this outside shell is only gonna give you 30 foot. Do a good job with it because that holds everything together. That makes your project readable. Then the high dollar parts, size, scope, and financials, learning outcomes, and use skills. It's all about what you learn. Everything you do is about what you learn.
And to kind of break it down as far as going to the national level, how to score the best, simply, I was thinking about make it simple. In my mind, read the description. Even if you've been in that SAE category for years, read that description one more time. Then, read your application. It's already done, so read it. If there is anything in that application that does not match that description, you need to change it.
Yep.
So that's where I would start, and that's where I'm gonna start with mine. I'm gonna start working on mine, tomorrow, and I got some kids coming in next week. We're gonna work on, I think we got 4 to go to nationals this time, and that's where we're gonna start. Read the description. If there's anything in there that does not match the description, we are taking it out, changing it. And then the other thing we're gonna do is we're gonna read through, especially that first page, and make sure we are telling the story. The first page really is kind of a writing contest. As far as what you really want is you want the judge to feel like he's on the farm with you. You want them to know what your operation looks like, feels like, just, the tractors, what type of tractor, the amount of plants, the size of your garden, the amount of cows you got out there, the different things, you want that judge to feel like they're right there with you. And then that challenge, I think you really want that judge to identify with you a little bit on that challenge. Sympathize with you even. If you've got something that kind of gets to that point where they can kind of sympathize with you. Okay, we've got a hard-working kid that has really overcome something here. So I think that's really, really important. And then on those SAE hours, we're gonna look at ours before we submit them on and just make sure that we have got everything broke down to the point where we can get all the points we can. And then the last thing we're gonna do is look at all of our skills over again and make sure every single one of those skills relates to the project and make sure every single one of them is measurable. Anytime you can put a number in there, put a number in there. And same thing, I feel like same thing with your dates. You know, if you can say in June, or in 2021, in 2022.
Anything you can do to make it clear to the judge.
During the summer of 2021, during the fall of 2022, you know, I got this and it made this easier, and things like that. Those descriptions make a lot of difference, because when you read a lot of these applications, that's what separates the good ones from the bad ones, is the ones that really describe what they're doing. It's almost like, you know, if you're reading one of these articles in a magazine and you feel like, hey, you know, that sounds like a really cool farm, and I like that operation, I wish I could go see that place. It's kind of what you want your judge to feel like when they read through your application. Man,
I like to listen to storytellers, and a good storyteller makes you feel like you're there.
Mhm.
I always like Gene Robertson.
And that is a lost art
Yep.
today. You know, I really seriously, and this doesn't have as much to do with proficiency awards, this is just for free. But I was thinking about this year, like, yeah, I need to like pull up some Jerry Clower videos and have just like a whole storytelling unit in my class. Like, it's a lost art. People don't know how to do it. I love listening to good storytellers. And, you know, good writing, and even, it irritates me to watch TV now. I'm like, that's the laziest writing I've ever seen in my life, you know. It's a terrible story. It was all predictable, you know. That's why I don't watch the Hallmark Channel or whatever. But
Yeah, you pretty well tell what's happening.
Chip,
But-
one suggestion you made too is to have your application read by somebody that doesn't necessarily know anything at all about
Yeah,
agriculture.
If you have somebody read it that has no clue of what you do, or it's better, somebody that even doesn't know much about farming, and see if they can relate.
But be careful with your English teachers. Sometimes they focus on the wrong things.
Yeah,
And you're just talking about having them read the performance, A, B, and C.
Yeah, yeah. Because they're not gonna understand the
Right,
financial
yeah.
part, just A, B, and C. My English teachers would read, they read it all, because they got involved with those kids, and they wanted, they would read the national chapter, or whatever we had going on, they would try to do it. Back to the storytellers, if you hadn't ever heard Gene Robertson or Donald Davis, they could find them on YouTube.
Very good.
They're Southern, Gene Robertson played it all.
I was listening to Donald Davis.
Donald Davis, I've heard him several times live. He's just great.
Y'all have any other questions for us?
We're good?
Where exactly is the breakdown of points that you were talking about? I know you don't have it pulled up there, but.
It will be in, you can, I think, still get rubrics.
I can pull up my A and T up there if you want to, you can see it.
Yeah,
Not A here.
it should be on AET.